Good morning. Welcome to the Boise Unitarian Universalist Hard Name Fellowship. Our minister, Sarah Lawal, is on the last month of her sabbatical, and we are eagerly looking forward to her return in September, which is not that far away right now. I'm Patricia Heeb. I'm your celebrant for the service this morning. I'm joined in the pulpit by Laura Stavoe, who will bring this morning's sermon, Finding Footholds, which explores places to begin during hard times. Hello to all of you online. Wave to the camera. I saw a few symbols going out, and I hope they were all nice ones. Hello to all of you. I already said that. I ask that, for those of you in the room, I ask that you keep your phones in worship mode if you need to do that now. And for those of you online, will you please keep your mics turned off? This is that rare occasion when you viewers are asked to not speak out. In joining here this morning, even if it's your first time, you're entering a community dedicated to making a profound love visible in the world. We're dedicated to nurturing spiritual growth, enhancing justice, and supporting the personal and collective work of tempering judgment with compassion and mercy. If that call speaks to your heart, this is your place to be. Whatever your spiritual heritage, no matter if or how you pray, whomever you love, however you traveled here, your presence is a blessing. If you're a newcomer, a special welcome. If you're online, please introduce yourself in the chat and fill out the newcomer form that's also in the chat. For those newcomers here in the sanctuary, you can find a link to that form out in the vestibules on this QR bookmark thing. We hope you will stick around after the service to introduce yourselves, and either in the breakout room, if you're on Zoom, or here in our new coffee area, open for to-go coffee to take home or to take out on the patio and chat and get acquainted. We extend, should have taken this off. Sorry about that. I needed a drink was what reminded me. We extend this welcome while solemnly acknowledging that we gather upon stolen land that once sustained a free people.
We come from and live on land considered sacred by indigenous people known as Bannock, Paiute, Shoshone, and many other tribes that lived here sustainably for thousands of years. We strive to understand and reframe our responsibilities to land, to community. In the spirit of respectful reciprocity, we honor the original caretakers of this place. We affirm the relationships we have to each other, including our relations to animals and insects that inhabit the water, land, and sky. We recognize the relationship, the responsibility to quiet creeks, rushing rivers, rustling grasses, to sprawling forests, to the brilliant palettes of the sky, to the roots that grip the soil, to the earth beneath our feet. Water is life. To all of us affected by the boarding school revelations, may we be granted compassionate understanding. May we find healing in the harm that lives in our history. We honor and support the right to sovereignty for our indigenous neighbors, we acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough. Now, let us breathe together. Let us take a moment to enjoy the delicious air, the oxygen provided by tree. Hold to the warm light of sun. Consider the solidity, the groundedness of earth. Flow with refreshing, life-giving water. Let the mud settle. Find clarity of mind and spirit. Welcome our ancestors. Enjoy this present moment together.
I have a few announcements this morning. On August 20th, that's next Saturday, in the spirit of sabbatical rest, come read, feed, and relax while enjoying the quiet and beauty of our inner and our outdoor sanctuaries. We'll provide breakfast tacos, fruit, water, and coffee. That's next Saturday, 9 a.m. to noon. Come and hang out. It's our practice here at the Fellowship to donate 25% of our pledged plate offering to support social justice ministries. For the month of August, our plate partner is the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence, which is working to create a change in the prevention and intervention and response to domestic violence, dating abuse, stalking, and sexual assault. And while we no longer pass the plate during the service, we do rely on your generosity to support the programs and the operation of the fellowship. So please visit our website at boiseuu.org to see the many ways that you can make a gift. As we enter this time of worship, let's take a moment to breathe together. Fill your body with breath, knowing that our breath connects us to one another, to our bodies, and to our planet. Our breath offers the opportunity for stillness, to tune in to our spiritual center, to listen deeply to our heart's own longing. Let the thines and the thous of our poem be addressed to that which sustains you. Thou art the song of my heart in the morning. Thou art the dawn of truth in my soul. Thou art the dew of the roses adorning. Thou art the woven whole. Thine is the grace to be steadfast in danger. Thine is the peace that none can destroy. Thine is the face of the need-driven stranger. Thine are the wings of joy. Thou art the deep to the deep in me calling. Thou art a lamp where my feet shall tread. Thy way is deep to the peril of falling. Thou art my daily bread. Thine be the praise to have my spirit uplifted. Thou art the sea to each flowing stream. Thine be the days that are gathered and sifted. Thou art the deathless dream. At this hour, in small towns and big cities, in living rooms and sanctuaries, other I can never say our name. I've been here for years. Unitarian Universalists are also lighting chalices, reminding us that we're a part of a larger community of faith. As we light the chalice here in the sanctuary, for you in our virtual community, if you have a chalice nearby, we invite you to light it now and share where it is lit on the chat. With our collective chalices lit in all of our spaces, I offer this call to worship from Reverend Gretchen Haley. Whatever you have come in anticipating, whatever you expect or worry for our world, for our future, for our lives, let it go. Make a space in your heart to be surprised. Make a room in your soul for a new story to take shape. Let astonishment be possible at this life that remains a miracle. Imagine here in the bursting of joy, relentless and resilient, coming in waves, washing over us, music, story, silence. And still this dreaming together, being hope for each other, and courage to believe in this new day dawning for all of us. Come, let us worship together. As we
Good morning, everyone. Join me in getting extra cozy for our Time for All Ages this morning. Today, we're going to hear the story of a young Hmong girl who is settling into a new home. Seasons change, and so is the world around her. It is called A Map into the World by Kao Kalia Yang, and it'll help us explore how we can reorient ourselves when we're faced with change and loneliness. Let's listen. This is also illustrated by Seo Kim, and here we can see our protagonist, Pan Tao, running up the sidewalk with her father at this brand new house. The sign in front says, "For sale." The first time we saw the swing and the slide and the garden of the green house with the big windows, my mother sat down in a chair in the backyard and said she did not want to get up. Tao Tao and I looked at the garden, and she pointed out tomatoes, green beans, and a watermelon as round as my mother's belly. Tai Tai knelt down to touch the dirt. I asked my mother if I could try the swing, and she said, "Yes, Pan Tao." The greenhouse became our house. I helped Tai Tai hang the special story cloth about how the Hmong got to America on the empty wall by the big window in the living room. And I want to take a moment and share with you what that tapestry looks like up close. Here we see this is part of her family's history, something to help them remember and appreciate their extended family and where they come from. We saw an old man and woman through the window. They waved, we waved back. Later, my mother and father brought me across the street. The old man's name was Bob, and the old woman's name was Ruth. Up close, I could see that they were even older than Tai Tai. Tai Tai and I were in the garden picking tomatoes and beans and checking on the watermelon when my parents brought home my baby brothers from the hospital. I ran to the gate. The boys were smaller than my baby dolls, but cuter than any doll, with their fuzzy heads and red lips and brown round eyes. Some days the babies were very loud. I covered my ears with my hands and asked my father to take me outside. Bob and Ruth sat on their special bench, and we waved back and forth. There's a lot changing in Patao, in her life, all around her. The leaves of the 2 ginkgo trees by Bob and Ruth's house turned yellow like apricots. One day, a brisk wind blew and the fan-shaped leaves came flying down. They covered the grass and the street and the dark mouth of the drain. Bob raked while Ruth sat and watched. I brought a leaf for the babies to touch, but my mother said, "They're still too young, Patao." The snow made the world quiet around us. We stopped seeing Bob and Ruth outside. The snowflakes fell on their driveway and glittered in the gray light. I made a ball of snow for my brothers, but it melted before they woke up from their nap. Pantao is trying to figure out how to play with her brothers. She just wants to share all of these cool and interesting things she's finding, but it's not working. She's not able to show them so they understand. At night, I looked out our big window at Bob and Ruth's house to see their lights shining across the dark street. Sometimes I saw a shape of a person looking back at me. I waved, but the shadow person never waved back. On a cold morning, cars came to our block, filling the street. Car doors slammed as men and women in thick jackets walked quickly to Bob and Ruth's house. My father said, "Ruth has died. Her family is coming to say goodbye." I felt sad for Ruth. My brothers just played with the toys above them. If you can see, she is surrounded by her artwork hanging on the wall as her own drawings. Beside her is the Hmong story cloth. After the Hmong New Year, my baby brothers learned how to sit up on their own, and we all sat looking out the window together. I clapped for them when a plane flew across the high skies, and they laughed every time. The house across the street looked empty. The ginkgo trees reached for the sky with their thin fingers. When the snow started melting, I could not wait to return to the swing and the slide and the garden. My baby brothers crawled all over the floor, underneath the table and the chairs. They were like puppies, their tongues licking everything. I found the first worm of spring on the sidewalk and named her Annette. I wanted to bring her inside so my brothers could watch her wiggle, but my mother said, "I don't think so, Pantao." I wonder what signs of springs you look forward to. Snails and flowers and green leaves. The world became green again, and finally we all went outside. Tai Tai planted green onions. I picked flowers from the lilac bushes for my brothers to smell. They opened their mouths and tried to eat them. My mother said, "Don't let them eat flowers, Pantao." Lilac is my favorite smell. We took the babies outside again the next day after lunch. Bob's garage door opened, and we all watched as he pushed out his special bench. He sat down all alone. I pulled on my mother's sleeve until she looked at me. I whispered an idea into her ear. I wonder what her idea is. My mother and I crossed the street and walked over to Bob. I let the sidewalk chalk bucket swing in my hands. I asked my mother to ask Bob if I could draw on his driveway. I said, if he doesn't like it, the rain will come and wash it away. Bob nodded and said, go ahead. I love all the rainbow colors she has in her chalk bucket. My mother and Bob talked in low voices. I could hear Bob say, Ruth, she was with me for 60 years. I started my picture with a teardrop, and then I made it splatter like sunshine. I drew lines leading away from the splattered sun in many directions. I drew a line that led to the garden. There I put yellow ginkgo leaves. I drew a line that led to the grass. There I made sparkling snow. I drew a line to the sidewalk. There I put a smiling worm named Annette. I drew an arrow to her house. There I added lilac flowers. And then I drew a line, the biggest line of all, toward the street, and there I drew the whole world. When I was done, I walked quietly to my mother and to Bob. They stopped talking and Bob shook my hand. What did you draw for me? He asked. I said in a whisper, a map into the world, just in case you need it. Here we can see a bigger drawing of all the things that she's drawn. We see the airplane, we see people in the street, we see the special bench that Bob and Ruth sat in the front of her house. Bob said, I think I might. I wonder, what do you think it means to create a map into the world? Have you ever had someone show you things that they love, whether big like a whole season or small like a worm named Annette? How did it feel to share their excitement and their love? I wonder, in your own map into the world, what would you draw? What cool things are you excited to share with other people? And who can you share your map with? Join me now in blessing our beloved community with song as we bless this multi-generational community full of ever learning, ever growing, ever justice seeking beloveds. Thank you.
May your mind be open to new learning. May your lips bring truth into the world. May your heart know love and your hands do the work of justice as you go your way in peace. As you go your way in peace.
Landscape by Mary Oliver. Isn't it plain that the sheets of moss, except that they have no tongues, could lecture all day, if they wanted, about spiritual patience? Isn't it clear the black oaks along the path are standing as though they were the most fragile of flowers? Every morning I walk like this around the pond, thinking, if the doors of my heart ever close, I'm as good as dead. Every morning so far, I'm alive. And now the crows break off from the rest of darkness and burst up into the sky, as though all night they had thought about what they would like their lives to be, and imagined their thick wings.
Putting together the elements of the service around the theme Finding Footholds got me thinking about footholds in general, and this story came to mind. Each Thursday morning, I meet with longtime Booth member Barbara Alexander at her house, and we cut and paste together small collages called art cards, kind of like baseball cards. And I guess if you're a real artist, you trade them with other artists. I just make them because it's fun. And Barbara and I use our time as we're cutting and pasting to exchange stories about our lives. This week, Barbara shared a story that I realized later was about footholds, which the dictionary describes as a secure position from which further progress might be made. Back in the 70s and 80s, Barbara was in a group of Booth women whose children were all in the religious education program. As they came together for their teenagers' church field trips and other RE activities, over time, they developed life-enhancing relationships. For instance, this group of mothers each week met to make bread together. Each of them had a part in the making. They would alternate meeting at their different homes. One would bring the whole wheat. One would bring the mill for the grinding. One would bring the big mixer. One would bring the recipe for that week. Raising teenagers can be, as we know, a taxing journey sometimes. The women's friendships, so naturally forged, created the support to create the footholds to navigate that challenging time in a joyous and connected way. For Mary Oliver, the footholds came from nature. For Barbara, they came from meaningful friendships. And it made me think, maybe Barbara and art cards are a foothold for me. We now turn to take a time to acknowledge the joys and sorrows present in the lives of the Booth community, so that we might share the happiness and might comfort the sadness. A reminder that you can submit your joys and sorrows online each week via the link on our website. Our virtual community will continue to share their joys and sorrows in the chat. And then we combine our collective joys and sorrows each month and share them in a community-wide email. Because it's this, through our sharing with one another, that we forge the deep bonds of community and connection. It's with great sadness and a heavy heart that I share that Carol Wexelberger has died. Jay and his family are together, and we hold them dearly in our hearts. Carol is a longtime Booth member. She was a joyous, joyous spirit, and she was famous in the fellowship for her wonderful and continuous hugs that she was so generously spread around for us. We will announce a service when the plans have been made, and Jay and the boys, his two sons, would welcome your greetings and your cards and support. Also, we are grieving with Edna Groves and Jackie and Susan, her daughters. Tom Groves died recently also from complications of a fall that he took. And they also would welcome your prayers and your thoughts and cards. If you have someone that you are holding in your heart at this time, I invite you to say their name loud out into this fellowship so that we might share your joy and your unhappiness with you. May the arms of this community hold all of our joys and sorrows, those named and those that remain silent. May we feel the grace that surrounds us and be transformed by the spirit of life and love, with warmth to celebrate our joys and with gentleness to soothe our aching hearts.
There is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all. I rest in this love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in His love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding us. We rest in His love. We rest in His love. We rest in His love.
Our speaker this morning, Laura, is a longtime Idahoan and a new booth member. And we are so pleased how many people step forward and give a sermon when they are still getting acquainted with us. Very brave, and we appreciate your presence, Laura.
Thank you, Patricia. And thank you to everyone here. I just want to say that I felt so welcomed. I started attending in May of 2021, and your welcoming congregation makes a difference. Thank you so much. When my husband John comes in the bedroom, I tell him that I'm reading a book by Frank Church's son for my chaplaincy school. That's what I've come to naming what others call seminary. Because in my neighborhood, seminary means classes for the LDS kids in the brick building across from the high school. John likes me to say, a master's in divinity, so he can tell his friends he's going to get me a cape and a wand upon graduation. I read to him from Forrest Church's Universalism for a 21st Century, the words his father chose for his tombstone. I never knew anyone who felt self-important in the morning after spending the night in the open on an Idaho mountainside under a star-studded summer sky. Well, I've known a few, John says, laughing, but I don't camp with them after that. John and I fell in love on the rivers that course down those mountains, our favorite being the Middle Fork of the Salmon and the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, 2 million acres named after Idaho's last and longest-serving Democratic senator from 1957 to 1981. Forrest Church uses this epitaph, which his dad decided on 3 weeks before he died of pancreatic cancer, as a way to reference humility and awe, which he considers the handmaidens of a heartfelt universalism. Having camped between canyon walls with a river of bright stars above and the dark current of the salmon slipping downstream all night long, I agree it evokes the kind of awe and humility that feels more like wholeness than smallness. On rivers, I even began to love Idaho. I had moved here on impulse in my 20s and then accidentally built a whole life. At first, it was not a love match. There were few good restaurants, and at work, I was constantly at odds with the school board on everything from sex education to books they wanted banned to whether we could mention the existence of gay people, which of course included students in my high school class. It wasn't until my 30s, newly single, and mom to twin 4-year-old native Idahoans, that I took up backpacking and whitewater kayaking as a way to survive the weekends my sons were at their dad's. Eventually, I belonged to Idaho, and not only when I was in the backcountry. For work, I traveled to rural communities, to hospitals, to juvenile detention centers, as a writer in the schools. I would read my students' poems about riding a snow machine across the icy lake, or missing their grandmother's tamales, or the creek behind their ranch. I still hated Idaho politics, but how we voted no longer seemed the most important thing, as my heart opened to so many stories. My sons were in first grade when I began dating John. I believed in love and God and all matter of things holy, but on the topic of marriage, I was an atheist. Marriage was unnecessary and illogical, especially with 2 kids in tow, who I loved more than the stars themselves. I knew there were things that would supersede my commitment to any man. And if you couldn't say forever, what would a marriage vow even mean? Still, 4 years later, summer solstice, 2006, John and I stood before the prayer wheel in Haley, Idaho, that releases 10,000 blessings skyward with each turn. The boys were on the cusp of middle school, and John's daughters leaned into their partners, and we made a kind of 12-step recovery version of a vow. We promised to care for ourselves and each other and our love on this day, each day, which in retrospect, if you actually do it, is a pretty good way to keep a wedding vow. I was standing in the parking lot of my dad's condo in Hawaii last February, listening to the annoying dinging from John's truck door through my phone, when he told me the MRI revealed the disc in the right lobe of his liver was cancer. We were stunned. From the news, which came from a wellness exam. I made plans to fly home. I tell my students when their world is falling apart, it's okay if you can't write one thing that makes sense, but take notes. Not only about what you feel, but what you see. Include nouns. Objects look different in times of upheaval, and later they'll contain clues to how you got through. What I'm noticing here in the middle is that these days it's easier to love John than to love Idaho. Even with his bum liver and the endless string of medical tests so he can take his place on the transplant list and hopefully live. Even with my stubborn intimacy issues, I haven't experienced even a trace of wanting to run. In fact, when John tried to get me to stay in Maui for another week while he investigated the diagnosis from home, thinking maybe he could save our planned-on vacation together if I stayed, my limbs wouldn't let me. I took a red-eye home and half slept, half prayed while flying over the dark Pacific. Some mornings, when I wake up, I can't remember which one of us has cancer. So entwined I feel with this man. 21 years after that first summer kayaking together, I'm in. Idaho, I've wanted to leave. Not consciously. I'm not pulling up real estate ads in liberal enclaves or looking for work in coastal towns. It's more the rolling over in my sleep kind of leaving. With Idaho, I'm pretending there's no love between us, even to myself. Forrest Church writes, universalism is an exacting gospel. Taken seriously, no theology is more challenging, morally, spiritually, or intellectually. To love your enemy as yourself, to view your tears in another's eyes, to respect and even embrace otherness, rather than to merely tolerate. I think of the vigil at the Idaho Capitol building, summer 2020, a black teen up at the mic, and middle-aged white men in the bed of a pickup, guns across their laps, blaring a siren each time the young woman began to speak. Eventually, friends whisked her off the steps, the crowd dispersed, the men in the pickup took a lap. There have been 100 other bad things that have happened recently in Idaho, some of them even more violent, some of them legislated and far-reaching. But that is the image that arises often when I think, can I still love Idaho? Sometimes I wonder, new UU family, if you realize what you've signed us up for in this big tent, this religion named after not only oneness, but on the salvation of all. And in this life, not some hereafter, and with no resurrected Jesus to necessarily do the loving for us. Can our circle really be wide enough to include the men cradling guns and Janice McGeachin attending white nationalist conferences while running against the current governor because he isn't conservative enough? A governor who signed laws allowing the killing of up to 90% of the wolf population and banning the teaching of critical race theory in Idaho schools and gutting rights to reproductive health care. And if not, what does universalism mean? And where and when do we open our hearts? Bernard Loomer, in his essay, The Size of God, writes, love does not create our essential interrelatedness. Love is an acknowledgement of it. We love because we are bound to each other, because we live and are fulfilled in, with, and through each other. And maybe this is what James Luther Adams gets at with the words, it is not reason alone, but reason inspired by raised affection that is necessary for salvation. I'll admit, I wanted to argue for a stronger word. Affection sounds like fondness, something with a pastel hue. And once you have birthed an infant, or walked a friend through the end stages of cancer, or listened to a story of an alcoholic trying to get sober, you never again associate love only with softness or pastel colors. But maybe raised affections is how we begin to see with our hearts. Sometimes when I'm failing at love, it is because I have stopped looking. Maybe out of desire for comfort, or to protect myself from grief, or out of wishful thinking or exhaustion. Sometimes I can't start with love, but with raising my eyes to notice the fine, shimmering threads of the interconnected web, that I can do. Whenever I hear the Paul Tillich reference to the ground of our being, I see my feet on an Idaho trail leading to an alpine lake, circled in lodgepole and ponderosa. I know this is the Westerner in me, sense of place and all. And it also echoes what I've learned from 12-step rooms. My friend Louise says, be where your feet are. It's a good place to stay sober from, to notice from. It is also a way to avoid turning an ankle. It sounds like a low bar, I know, kind of like loving your husband just for today. I think many of us in recovery do this to offset a tendency towards grandiosity. When I arrived in the rooms, I was a teenager, checking sobriety out on the way to killing myself. I didn't see the point of not drinking for one day. I wanted a wand and a cape and to be the master of divinity, or nothing at all. But I stayed for one sober day, and then 14,000 more. It has turned into a life. Like you congregations, 12-step recovery offers a community with no creed, though there is a suggestion to seek a power greater than oneself. Sometimes I call this power God, sometimes love, and sometimes I just call it paying attention. Whichever name I use, I find strength. In her collection of essays, Dwellings, A Spiritual History of the Living World, poet Linda Hogan writes, "It is winter, and there is smoke from the fires. The square-lighted windows of houses are fogging over. It is a world of elemental attention, of all things working together, listening to what speaks in the blood. Whichever road I follow, I walk in the land of many gods. They love and eat one another. Walking, I'm listening in a deeper way. Suddenly, all my ancestors are behind me. Be still, they say, watch and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands." You family, as I think about the task that we have given ourselves with our name and our history and our hope, I wonder if maybe salvation starts not with saving, maybe not even with loving, but with noticing what is in front of us and around us and within us to love. May it be so. Amen.
Thank you, Laura. That was beautiful. Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of love, we pause to quiet ourselves so that in the stillness we might feel what stirs within. Each breath draws us closer to the pulse of life, and with exhalation, we make room for something new. We find in this gathering the comfort of those who care. May we encounter patience along our growing edges and compassion in our most tender spots. May our gestures of compassion and generosity seed possibilities. May we find the inspiration and encouragement we need for our challenges. When life presses in and shifts us off balance, when pain assails us, when frustration mounts, may the rhythm of our breath steady us and bring us back to the open doors of our heart. Amen.
We lift our candles in the darkness. We stand together in the night to mourn and bear each other's pain, to claim our better selves again. We are the bearers of the light. We send our hope into the silence. We lift our voices sure and strong, to set the human spirit free, to sing our shared humanity. We are the keepers of the song. We are the keepers of the song. We raise our eyes to the heavens, though the clouds may hide the stars. We stand, we sing, we shine our light. This is who we are. We join as one for peace and justice. Join as one. We sing to make the broken whole, to speak the truth, to take a stand. We walk together hand in hand. We are the drumbeat of the soul. We are the drumbeat of the soul. Our journey urges us onward, even though we've come so far. We stand, we sing, we shine our light. This is who we are. We raise our eyes to the heavens, though the clouds may hide the stars. We stand, we sing, we shine our light. We shine our light. We shine our light. This is who we
Friends, I ask you to rise as you are able and place your hands over your heart for our closing blessing. I bring you this poem from the young and extraordinary poet Amanda Gorman. I can't dance it like she does, but the words are here. To begin again isn't to go backward, but to decide to go. Our story is not a circle carved, but a spiral shed shaped spinning like a lung on the bank of speech. Breathe with us. We spiral on, pushing up and out like a growing thing making its form out of the earth. In a poem, there is no end, just a place where the page glows wide and waiting like a lifted hand, poised and paused. Here is our bond, our unbordered by bone. Perhaps love is how it feels to breathe the same air. All we have is time, is now. Time takes us on. How we are moved says everything about what we are to each other. And what are we to each other, if not everything? Blessed are we all. Go in peace. A reminder that our new coffee space is open. Please leave your masks on. On Zoom, stay around for the breakout rooms to get acquainted and chat with your neighbors. So long.